are people actually building real production systems, or is this all hype? What's the ROI? I guess from that perspective, what are you seeing and how do you think about that?
Nissan has been using it for like self-service analytics, and Zoom, of all companies, have been using it for querying the customer data and from ERP and other data sources, building intelligence apps with Cortex at the front and center of their AI tech stack.
Can you talk a little bit about the Cortex AI course that you've developed?
We have a new program called North Star program, where we do have these different courses on Snowflake to help developers and builders really skill up and think about taking their next step in their career. The latest course is Introduction to Generative AI with Snowflake. How could you actually use these generative AI features that we just talked about, like the Cortex suite of AI features, to build different AI applications?
Well, you're actually back for the third time. I feel like if you get to 5 times, we might have to create some kind of jacket to give you.
Oh, I see. I was having other plans. Once I'm there 5 times, I'm going to take over as the host.
Yeah, we might just have you replace me at that point. Hey everyone, Sean here, and we're back for 2025. And to kick things off, we have Vino Duraisamy back on the show from Snowflake, and to talk all things Cortex AI. Cortex AI is Snowflake's generative AI platform, originally designed to help analysts take advantage of LLMs within SQL, but has expanded its functionality tremendously to support everything from talking to your data through their analyst capabilities to building full AI-powered applications, and now even has support for agents. Vino breaks it all down for us and also chats about a new generative AI course that she built. It's great to be back with Huddle for the year. And as always, if you have questions or suggestions for the show, please reach out to Alex or me. And with that, let's get you over to my interview with Vino. Vino, welcome to Software Huddle.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's always exciting to talk to you.
Yeah, you're actually back for the third time. I feel like if you get to 5 times, we might have to create some kind of jacket to give you like the 5-timers club on SNL. This is rarefied air. I think you're the first 3-time repeat guest that we've had.
Oh, I see. I was having other plans. Once I'm there 5 times, I'm going to take over as the host.
Yeah, we might just have you replace me at that point.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. So we're talking all about Snowflake Cortex AI today. But before we get into the details of Cortex, given that you've been at Snowflake for I think like a year and a half or so now, deeply steeped in this world of AI, I guess take a step back at that. Like, what is sort of the most surprising thing that you've come across since you've been working, for Snowflake and in the space?
Mm-hmm. The most surprising thing, I would say, like when I thought about AI and when the LLM or generative AI hype took over, the last thing that I would have guessed is seeing these LLM functions. So a SQL user could be using these generative AI techniques. Like somehow in my head, right, SQL is like some age-old technology or like a language that has existed since 80s, 90s, and then generative AI, and like marrying these two together and making generative AI available through SQL functions. I don't think I would have seen this coming, but also I can totally see how powerful this is, and also goes on brand with Snowflake's, making everything simple and giving everything easy access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you see that as kind of like, I guess like Snowflake's position in the market is, let's take the person who's like an analyst that's used to writing SQL and now give them the power of being able to run, just like we might run like a sort of a SQL transformation on data. We can now run like a Gen AI powered transformation on the data. It could be like language translation or summarization or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely. Also, right, like between AI and data, I always feel like there is this symbiotic relationship going on because you need quality data to train your AI models. But then once you have these AI models, you can use the AI to make sense of more data. So naturally, it makes sense for the generative AI features to be available to the last mile, data scientist or like citizen data person to make use of. But just that, we have all the generative AI features such as like, summarization, translation, and sentiment analysis available. So the person at the end of the day doesn't even have to understand how it works under the hood. Just like you're using the min and max in SQL, you could just use the summarize and translate without having to worry too much about the nitty-gritties of AI and such. So that's
I don't need to know exactly how like the sort algorithm is implemented behind the scenes to use the sort algorithm. I just need to know what the output of sort is going to be and what that accomplishes for me.
right. So yeah, this is definitely one of the biggest exciting things for me.
How does like Snowflake think about it's beyond this, like its position in the market and what it's trying to accomplish with Cortex? Like, is it trying to go beyond just the analysts to where does it kind of fit in the greater AI stack? I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think definitely when we started out, right, we were thinking about democratizing the generative AI to these analyst persona or all of these data practitioners. But then as we go, along this cycle, we are also now thinking about a comprehensive AI platform or comprehensive AI suite for, developers of different expert levels and different use cases. For example, we have Cortex Analyst or these LLM functions, primarily in the analytics side of the world, but all the way to we have Cortex Search, which is like RAG-based, search engine that you can build off of. And then also this, container services that allows one to build very sophisticated AI applications and algorithms, right? So and now we have, True Lens and also Cortex agents available. So really what we're going for today is that starting out, it was more about bringing the power of Gen AI to data practitioners. But now as we think more about adoption in the enterprise settings, we've gone all in on comprehensive AI features available for all sorts of use cases and users. So that's kind of how I see. And also, right, Snowflake being Snowflake, really leveraging the ecosystem. For example, the list of models that are available in Cortex, Model Garden, all the way to even DeepSeek as of last week, right? So it's just, I would say, leveraging the power of the ecosystem and like really pulling in the power of the ecosystem into Cortex Suite as well, making it available for all the users. So that's kind of the comprehensivity or like the unified platform is what we're going for, I would say.
Right. Actually, one of the big questions that I see, people raise all the time about AI is like, especially when we're talking about generative AI predominantly, but like people ask, are people actually building real production systems or is this all hype? What's the ROI? I guess from that perspective, what are you seeing and how do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, firstly, of course, there was definitely a bit of a hype that all of us were kind of riding the wave. But then beyond a point, you cannot just be riding the hype wave. You need to think through what the ROI is and where do we need to invest in everything. And most of our customers, for example, right, I'm sure everybody is running POCs before they actually adopted it into production workloads. But there has been like an array of customers who've been using it in the real production systems too. I think if I remember from some of the webinars, like Nissan has been using it for like self-service analytics, and Zoom, of all companies, have been using it for querying the customer data and from ERP and other data sources, building intelligence apps with Cortex at the front and center of their AI tech stack. So there has been usage throughout from POC all the way to real production workloads too in different companies. But of course, I'm sure there are different customers who are in these varying phases of adoption and implementation. But I could see at this time there are real production workloads in use cases too. So that's very promising to see.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my personal take on it is that the ROI concerns are a little bit overblown for a number of reasons. One is that a lot of times in early technology, the cost might be presumably high, but then sort of the as you get more scale, the cost comes down. And of course, like, with DeepSeek, like the cost of a token just cut by like 1/20th, which is great news. It's kind of like, as the cost of transistors went down, that led to more computers. But there was a time when computers buying a PC, it was like only the 5 richest kings on the planet could afford a PC. So it's like, what is the ROI of owning that? Or even things like the internet and so on. Like you didn't have enough people on the internet in the early days necessarily to make as much money as you could make at a mall in a major municipality. But obviously things have changed a lot. So I kind of feel like it's a little bit, sort of trying to find some negativity to sort of put down the market when the reality is like most markets work that way, where at the beginning cost might be a concern, some concerns over, what is the ROI, but essentially you need to lay the groundwork for the infrastructure before you get to a place where you're really, companies are making a lot of money or seeing a high ROI on it.
No, I think it is fair because initially when there is hype, I'm sure everybody gets, carried away by the excitement of, what the possibility is and like what the art of the possible is. But then it is only natural for us to be grounded by the reality of it. Like, of course, nobody's not going to think about ROI and like, why would I invest and prioritize the investments in different workloads and so on. So I see it more as a natural like progress of a new technology that gets adopted, excitement, but also later being grounded by reality of what do we get out of it.
Mm-hmm. So when you were talking about, Cortex, sort of some of the core components from, obviously just, interacting with them at the model level, all the way to, things where I can just use a built-in function. I don't really need, I might not be building a full application, but I just want to perform some sort of like AI powered transformation on my data to build using things like Snowflake container services where I can actually build every, full application from scratch using whatever tools I want. Like, how does Snowflake and Cortex kind of think about the balance between having these pre-built AI capabilities while also allowing people to customize options? Because I feel like a lot of what I hear when I talk to people who are interested in starting to explore building with AI is like they want it to be really easy. But then for the companies who are actually building production systems, they're like, the frameworks and abstractions are too much. They're maybe not they get in the way, essentially building some of this stuff at scale, and they end up building a lot of this stuff from scratch. Just calling models directly and handling all the challenges with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would say how Cortex deals with it or how Cortex helps folks of these different expert levels is firstly, as you were saying, right? When I'm building a POC, just wanting to see what is possible with Snowflake, it totally makes sense for us to, play around with out of the box systems, out of the box functions to just see like what I could do with it really. But then once I think about implementing that in like a real production setting, there's always going to be nuances about my specific industry, domain, and data set that I want to like play around with. For example, you can build your own RAG-based chatbot application using Cortex Search. But then I spoke to somebody recently who said they want to be able to choose the top K documents that are being retrieved and is being used for the context, right? So there are different use cases in which like you need that extra level of customization required. So it's interesting that we do have such requirements, and Cortex also caters to these spectrum of users all the way from like naive user or like mostly data practitioner persona who don't have any idea of what AI is or even like what is an epoch that doesn't mean anything to them, all the way to data scientists and ML engineers who want to even fine tune a foundation model with their own custom data, who know the ins and outs of how to do a fine tuning job and what it means and how to configure the different parameters and so on. But like Cortex giving you this kind of spectrum of features and suite, making it easy for different use cases and industries to really, use it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of personas you have to serve there because you have sort of like the analysts, the kind of like probably people who are grown up with, using Snowflake. You have data scientists, maybe you have app developers. Like there's a whole spectrum of people with different needs.
Yeah, there is. And also, it also depends on like how much of complexity do you want to deal with it, right? Like sometimes, even if I'm a data scientist, I could be building my own sentiment analysis model. For example, it would just take a couple of days for me to pull everything together, bit of feature engineering, find the right, metrics to optimize for and all of that. But then at the other end, I still have this sentiment analysis function that's available readily for me. So although I am this persona that can understand all these AI in the data science features, it doesn't mean that I have to really go and use this sophisticated complex systems. But it is also at the end of the day an option or a choice for me to pick and choose the right tool or like the right level of complexity needed for the task at hand and not think too much about, oh, just because I'm a data scientist, I only have to build a model.
Right. Yes. That makes sense. Could you walk through like a typical implementation process for using Cortex? Let's say I wanted to, let's go from getting started, I want to do something basic, to actually to a place where I want to build an application.
Yeah, I think, okay, within Cortex, okay, before I even get into how do you build a project or like how do you use Cortex, maybe I want to take a step back and explain. We keep talking about Cortex as a broader umbrella term, but what exactly Cortex even means, what does it have underneath it? I would think of this Cortex suite as a bit of model garden and a bunch of AI primitives or AI building blocks, right? So this model garden is just like literally a list of open source and enterprise grade models available for us to use. It could be from, a Llama, Gemma, to even DeepSeek or Anthropic family of models. On the other hand, we have these AI primitives or AI building blocks that could vary in complexity, right? We have LLM functions, which are simple SQL and Python functions that give you the generative AI functionality. And then we have Cortex Analyst, which could be, used to build self-service analytics tools. Like Cortex Analyst could be your own personal analyst. You could ask any question and it would give you all the answers, just serve as an analyst for you. Then on the other end, we also have Cortex Search, for example, helps you with building a RAG-based application. And now we also have Cortex agents, which has this agentic capabilities that can automate series of steps to give you the answers that you're looking for. Again, I want us to think about Cortex as just this model garden and a bunch of AI primitives that help you accomplish what you need with it, right? So now, how do we want to use Cortex, right? So think about your data, which is already in Snowflake. Say, even if your data is not in Snowflake, you could definitely ingest data into Snowflake because that's kind of like the primitive the premise that we are, setting to actually work with Cortex. So you have your data, you say a bunch of PDF documents about some instruction manuals, about your machinery or factories or whatsoever. You need to ingest these documents into Snowflake. You can use Snowpipe or like Snowpipe streaming, depending on the nature of data this is. And then once you have the data sitting in Snowflake, you could be using, say, Document AI, for example, to make sense of this data, meaning extract the PDF data into a relational table. And then you can use this relational table as a base for Cortex Analyst, ask questions on the data in natural language, or use this table of data as this augmented context for a RAG-based, application and so on. But so this kind of has the workflow as the ingestion of data and then extract, structured data from this unstructured data that we've ingested, and then use the structured data as a premise or like a base to ask questions on in natural language. So this is kind of the implementation flow looks like. And I know this implementation would also change because we have recently announced to acquire this company called Data Bolo that would make it even more easier for us to ingest all sorts of structured and unstructured data into Snowflake. So hopefully the ingestion process becomes more seamless and makes it easy for us to read from all the different data sources.
Okay. And then, primarily like the types of applications that people are building, is it mostly focused on sort of internal applications that allow me to understand my data, or are these potentially customer facing applications?
I think some of these are internal, like say a data team's output, which are like, again, data teams are primarily serving our internal customers, like customer success teams and support teams and sales teams and marketing teams and so on, to help them make sense of these data. But I'm sure there are customers who are building external facing applications too, but I don't think I remember any off the top of my head.
Okay. And then how does things like Snowflake's like governance and security features get incorporated into what I'm doing in terms of building these applications?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to even like clarify here is that, when we think about governance or like data privacy and compliance with respect to I don't think there is any extra features that come in just because you're using generative AI suddenly. AI sits on this strong data foundation, and Snowflake, thankfully, already has stronger, data governance and security boundaries in place for the data that is already stored in Snowflake. So you have, all sorts of like encryption or even like data masking policies, depending on the role, like the RBAC and so on, right? Just because we have the data foundation and the data governance and compliance policies sorted out on the data, naturally by using this data, with AI, there is not so much of extra protection or extra governance policies that are needed. Of course, when you're using these generative AI features, you need to have a specific user role because the generative AI features are not available to every Snowflake user because like the nature of it is that it might explode in the Snowflake credits if it's not being used properly. But other than that, say if you're using Cortex, you need to have a Cortex user RBAC role to be able to run these generative AI, functions and APIs. But other than that, Snowflake's existing governance and security boundaries are perfectly, designed to take care of the AI requirements too.
And in terms of using some of these like AI primitives, like AI assistant or some of the functions that are built in, is the main sort of like interface of that always SQL?
Yeah. So with Cortex, the interfaces are, from SQL to Python APIs to all the way up to the REST APIs too. So if people do want to build applications with it, they could definitely use the REST API to build on top of it. So, but primarily it's SQL, Python, and REST APIs. Like I said, catering to the users of all complexity levels and expert levels.
And then if I want to take advantage, like use some of the existing like popular like AI frameworks that are out there, like LangChain, Llama Index, can I incorporate those things if I'm already building on those into what also using some of these primitives that are built with or like essentially available within Cortex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing about integrating with the existing AI frameworks is that firstly, they don't come out of the box within Snowflake as is. Like say, for example, if you're building a RAG-based chatbot and you want to chunk these PDF files and then find a way to really decide on the strategy, like how do you want to chunk them meaningfully and all of that. So currently we don't have anything out of the box that would help you do that. But if you do want to use, say, Llama Index, for example, you would be able to do that. But again, the integration is not out of the box. You would have to install the package and use it just like you would use any other package within Snowflake notebooks. But, I don't think we have like a formal or native Snowflake integration with any of these frameworks because, they're constantly changing. But of course, you're free to use any of these frameworks within Snowflake.
Yeah, so but I could write essentially Python code within Snowpark that is leveraging one of those libraries to do those types of operations if need be.
Exactly. Yeah.
What kind of chunking is supported out of the box for within Cortex?
I don't think we have a lot of out of the box support for chunking. That's what I was saying. So in even the RAG based chatbots that we build, we just use a simple strategy to just chunk these documents and have a specific overlap, which is you give like 500 characters overlap or 500 token overlap or like 100 token overlap. Like it's literally purely up to us because we don't have an opinionated way or strategy from Snowflake Cortex as of the moment we're talking today to do this.
Okay, and then what about like sort of traditional predictive ML? Is there some part of like the primitives available to take advantage of those types of models?
Yeah. Okay. So when I talked about how Snowflake Cortex goes with other libraries, it also definitely works with the Snowflake ML library or Snowpark for data engineering library and Streamlit, for example, and so on. So you can definitely work with the classical ML models using Snowflake ML library too.
And then that's like, can I host? Am I hosting those models myself within my Snowflake environment?
Yes, so we do have the model registry. So you, in a classical ML sense, you could have, trained your own ML models and then host them in the model registry. You can even have like different versions of these models from different runs. And then you can run inference against one of these models from the model registry and so on. That's like the very, classical traditional way of running ML that is also supported. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then do you see people sort of combining, predictive ML with generative AI?
I think so far we have we've seen customers build a couple of these applications, right? For example, these generative AI goes very much hand in hand in their existing data engineering and data science workflows, like sentiment analysis being the most popular one. For example, they would have their own detailed, for what do you talk about? Like say if I have customer support data, customer support ticket data that's stored in Snowflake, and I want to write a custom email or a custom email response to this support ticket based on what the root cause is, You could use the predictive ML to do the sentiment analysis, and then you could use the generative AI summarization to summarize the call and like kind of put them together to write a summary response. But again, because all of these are available to you as simple Python APIs, you could just build one app that could have multiple of these features. Like one would use the classical ML model and the other could, invoke these generative AI features and so on.
Yeah, so I could kind of use like, maybe like a cheaper process to do some triaging essentially of the data as it's flowing, and then use a more token intensive model to create essentially like a summarization or maybe even a response depending on what I'm trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's probably another thing that I wanted to highlight to you here too. Just because we're talking about Cortex and generative AI, I don't think it means that we should entirely stop using the classical ML models. I'm sure the generative AI models can do classification, sentiment analysis, and everything that we need to do too. But then unless we have the use case justified as to I really need to use these models, like I don't have time to do feature engineering or, any of that constraints, you could still do the classical ML models and run with them as well.
Mm-hmm. And then is some of the features around within Snowflake that help someone essentially transform natural language into like a SQL query that I can execute. Is that considered part of like Cortex as a platform, or is that kind of considered thought of as like a separate product?
Yeah, I think this is also part of the Cortex suite. So like I said, Cortex Suite has these multiple AI primitives. I would maybe think about them in like four big, major chunks. One is the LLM functions. You literally just call the function, it would do the generative AI for you, including summarization, translate, and sentiment analysis. The second I would think about is this natural language to SQL conversion, which is Cortex Analyst. What you're doing is you are typing your query in natural language. Cortex Analyst, with the semantic understanding of your table and data, translates this natural language into SQL, runs the query against the data, gives you back the answers. But again, as a data analyst or a data practitioner, you also get to see what query did it run, what is the semantic understanding did it have. You're also, you have the option to add additional notes and context that you want to give the Cortex analyst to get this answer just to make sure everything works fine. But again, this is part of the Cortex suite of AI primitives, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then can you also use that, like the analyst as an API if I was building some application that wanted to be able to do sort of that transformation process?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Cortex Analyst is also available as a REST API, so you should be able to use that as part of any other workflow or application that you're building as well for the whole text to SQL conversion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how does someone who's building on this like work? Think about like performance optimization. Like what is available for me to help make sure that I'm my inference process is performing at the level I need, or that I'm able to feed the data into like a RAG application in time. Like how do I sort of I guess like from a monitoring observability perspective, understand like what's actually going on in my application?
Yeah, so this one is a tricky thing to answer because, like I said, Snowflake being Snowflake, there is a lot of things that are being abstracted away from you. And when we're talking about inference costs and performance, for example, right? So we have this project called Swift KV that does inference cost and performance optimization under the hood. So anytime you are using Cortex models, or let's say, for example, you have this Llama 3.1 hosted in Snowflake that you're using as part of Cortex. Just because you're using the Llama 3 through Cortex, you get this optimization done by Swift KV to help the enterprises with, inference costs and performance, right? But this one runs under the hood, and as an end user, I have no visibility into, what kind of optimizations are being run. Just that I already get the benefit of this Swift KV optimization being done under the hood without even having any understanding of what it is exactly and why should even know about all those things. But like I said, this one, because of the nature of it, is under the hood, and you don't, as an end user, really get to see what happens and what kind of optimizations are being done. But if
From a cost perspective?
From the cost and performance perspective, in like latency and cost both. Like, for example, I think there were some benchmarks that were run where we measured, like how much of a cost and performance improvement does it give me over running the same model outside of Cortex. And I think it was close to like 70% performance and cost optimization. And like shout out to the AI engineering team. I think we've also open sourced Swift KV for the community to benefit from that as well. So there has been a lot of work going in from the AI research team and for the optimizations, specifically for inference cost and performance, because at the enterprise level, you really want to squeeze out as much of a performance as you can from the existing setup.
Yeah, especially as you start to build sort of more complex AI systems like agentic workflows or multi-agent systems. Like presumably you're going to be doing a lot more inference, more handoffs. Things can start to get expensive, both cost perspective as well as just compute cycles.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are some of the like key metrics someone should track when when building these types of applications?
I think how should one think about measuring the metrics of implementing these AI projects? Firstly, I would say because of the nature of generative AI and hallucination and such, right? The evaluation metrics are like way more important. I don't in my opinion, than like the ROI, because that is ROI is for the businesses to measure. But as an engineer who's implementing or building these AI systems, I need to evaluate, the reliability, accuracy, and the other things of these AI systems that we implement. So for that, again, the AI team has been working on this metric called RAG triad, which is like 3 different metrics on which we want to measure the efficiency of these RAG systems. And I think, like I said, like evaluating these AI models on how good they are at returning the responses that we want in a reliable way is way more important than the other metrics at least at this phase.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. How does like a lot of times when you're building any sort of generative AI application, you want to use some sort of like eval framework or roll your own eval framework, just like you would like unit testing for traditional software. Like, how does somebody use something like that with also building on top of Cortex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like I was saying, right, like the triad metrics that one should keep in mind while building with any AI system, not generally with Cortex, would be like, what is the relevance? Like, what is the retrieved answer relevant to the query that you're asking? And then also like the groundedness of it. Is the response grounded in the data that it is, reading from? Because for Cortex, right, you're not just asking it questions from nowhere. Like all of the questions that you're asking are out of the data that is already present in there. So like the most important metric is like how grounded is the data. I mean, how grounded is the answer in the data that we already have? Just making sure we avoid hallucinations is just like one way of trying to evaluate the efficacy of these models. And of course, at the end of the day, the toxicity of the response is being avoided, or like the irrelevance is being avoided. We also have True Lens, which offered guardrails as features in Cortex, which means you could be asking all sorts of questions to Cortex, but like all the toxic and I would say like the biased answers, so to speak, are filtered out by guardrails thanks to the Project True Lens as well. So if I have to say, like sum it up, the 3 metrics that I would, prioritize for evaluating these LLM systems is like the relevance of context, the context relevance to what was the query and what is the answer? Is there even like how relevant is the answer to the query? And then the second is the answer grounded on the data that I already offered to before asking the question. And then is the answer again relevant to the query? Because the context you pass to the models is different from the answer that you get. So there is just this triad of metrics that we want.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of like foundation models and like the evolution that's happening there and what's supported in Cortex, like I know Cortex supports like a plethora of different models, but first of all, how is it sort of like prioritized? And then also for someone who's building, like should they be thinking about which model they should actually use? Because if I have 10 different options, like which one do I select?
No. I think this is a good question. So firstly, though, for the list of models that are available in Cortex, like I think this is being said everywhere at this point now, like these foundation models are going to be commoditized and all the different models are going to be available for us to use. And which is kind of the truth because Cortex already has this suite of models that it supports. But how does one go about choosing the right model? I feel like there's been a bit of experimentation here and it really depends on one's preferences. But what we've seen in enterprises so far is that we always go try out a bigger model just to see if the problem at hand is being solved by this one specifically, right? Say if I want to do a summarization of this customer support ticket, I feed it to a larger, LLM and see if the model is able to handle and give me the right summarization. But once I do have that, I know what the art of the possible is. But now I'm trying to find a smaller model, like small enough model that can give me an accurate answer as good as the bigger model. So I try to experiment with the different smaller models to run the same task to see if I can achieve at least at par in accuracy of the answer, but at the same time cutting down on the cost and latency of it too. So this is kind of the pattern. I don't know if we have any sort of a pattern for what's the right model to pick, but that's something that we've seen folks do, customers do, to try out the bigger model, just figure out what the art of the possible is, and then try to get the smaller model to do the very similar thing, but at a fraction of the cost and latency.
Yeah. I mean, that's consistent with what I've seen as well. People do essentially like start with the biggest model possible, take that sort of off the table of all the things that could go wrong, and then, start to experiment with cheaper, smaller models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense.
Can you talk a little bit about the Cortex AI course that you've developed?
Oh, yeah. So Snowflake, we have a new program called North Star program where we do have these different courses on Snowflake to help developers and builders to really like skill up and think about taking their next step in their career. We have a series of courses, which is like first one was like introduction to Snowflake for anybody who's completely new to Snowflake, and the next of it was the introduction to data engineering with Snowflake, really like building the data foundations, how to work with data, transformation, ingestion, and all sort of it. And then the latest course is Introduction to Generative AI with Snowflake, because now that you have the foundations in place, how could you actually use these generative AI features that we just talked about, like the Cortex suite of AI features to build different AI applications. So I got to work on this specific course and it was out early this year. So it has about 3 modules, fully hands-on. And so we just get started right away building 3 portfolio projects at the end of the course, because the focus really is, wanting people to get started, just get to building right away instead of getting bogged down in theory too much or like the tutorial held too much. But I got some rave reviews to wake up to, so it's been a good month so far.
Oh, that's great. And then do you have to do sort of the like the intro to Snowflake, like those modules in order to get to this module, or can you skip ahead to the generative AI model?
Yeah, so for this course, we made sure that it could stand alone and be independent. So you could definitely skip directly to the generative AI course if you're, interested only in Gen AI. But the expectation, however, is that you're familiar with at least a bit of Python, like intro level Python or intro level Snowflake or intro level data science. You need to have at least one of the 3 to get started with this course, because the course is primarily Python focused. It is in Snowflake and uses generative AI. So some level of a background in any of the 3 should totally help you. But it's not only for data scientists and ML engineers, it is for all data practitioners. So even if you're a data engineer, like going like, what the hell is happening with Gen AI world? Can I get a high level overview of what's happening? This is something you should check out, just so you have an idea or like a mental map of what's happening in the Gen AI space in Snowflake.
Mm-hmm. And then when you're sort of like taking the course, is it recorded videos of you sort of doing instruction and then leading through sort of hands-on stuff that's self-guided? Like how does sort of the experience of taking the course feel to someone who's taking it?
I see. I think the course, starts with 3 different modules, and in each of them, we start right in saying, say, for example, I probably have like a 5-minute intro to what the Snowflake feature is that we're going to talk about. And then the whole video is about like a follow along or a hands-on lab style. So as I, share my screen and like run through the different code and like write, like live code it and then get people to follow along with me. So there is no, you just watch a video and then you have to go figure it out yourself. You could just do it along together and we build the 3 portfolio projects together as part of the course.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens if someone gets stuck? Where do they go to get help, essentially?
Yeah, so there is this forum within Coursera, and also we have linked it to the Snowflake forum as well. So they could post their questions in that forum or the Snowflake forum, and I'll be helping them with anything. And if it is Snowflake forum, there is, of course, like suite of Snowflake community members who are helping each other too.
Mm-hmm. And then what does someone get at the end of this course? Do they get like a certificate or, a shiny badge or something?
Yeah, you do both. So it's a 4-hour long course, not too long or not too short. So that gives you just the right amount of hands-on experience to build with Snowflake and get started with Snowflake. But at the end of the 4 hours and at the end of 3 full projects that you build, you get a certificate from Snowflake from Coursera as well, which you could also share it on LinkedIn and everywhere else. And like that's a shiny new badge on your wall, on your LinkedIn wall.
And then sort of, going outside the course and even outside of Cortex, like what are some of the developments in AI technology that you're particularly excited about?
I feel like, okay, this is, I don't even know this is something new. I feel like the whole world is just going agents, and agentic workflows the entire time. So I'm just going to be in
Agents
this.
are the new apps, I hear.
I know, right? So I don't think anybody would be surprised to do this. Also, because I've been very skeptical about, really, guys, workflow automation has existed ever since a long time. And is it really as interesting and promising? But now that I think about it, after having needed an agentic workflow for my own, like I've just started skiing this year and I've been having a really hard time finding parking reservations at these ski resorts. So I'm like, can somebody just like make sure anytime something comes up, like, get a parking reservation done for me? And I'm like, oh my God, this is like a perfect use case for an agent to do it for me. Because they also tend to like update their website a bit here and there. So like even if you write a script and like scrape it with Selenium and like the old school way, it always gets lost sometimes if they update the website. So I'm like, this is like a truly perfect example for an agentic workflow to like take over and like help me. So now that I see this like a real life example of how my life can be made easier through this agentic workflows, I'm like super excited about what they can do for us. And also, I know we said not to think about Snowflake, but generally about AI in the industry. We also have Snowflake Cortex agents coming up this week. So what's not to be excited about agents?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit about that, but just on the web scraping thing, there's actually a company called Reworked, which does because web scraping, like if you've ever built a web scraper, like you run into this problem, especially if you don't own the website, that people make updates without telling you. So then your web scraper breaks because you're assuming certain formats.
A certain format.
Yeah. So what Rework does is they actually have an agent that listens for updates to the website, and then it writes code specific to that current version of the website. So they'll use an LLM to essentially generate a deterministic set of code that can now scrape it, and then they use another agent to essentially validate that the code is correct. So they can, so that way, like instead of you having to write the code to do sort of the old school web scraping and then keep it up to date, they're basically using AI to sort of power that process, which is pretty cool.
I see. I think I'm definitely going to check that out. You say Rework?
Reworked.
Reworked.
Without E at the end, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I was kind of curious about what Snowflake's take on agents. Like as you said, like everybody's talking about it. So presumably Snowflake's going to come up with their sort of their answer to agents. So what is happening there in terms of what you can do with this new agent functionality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. If I take a step back and go back to what Cortex is, right? Like I said, it is a model garden and then a bunch of AI primitives. And as a user, I was picking up these different primitives to kind of like as building blocks and built it on my own. But now we have this agentic framework, which is again an abstraction over these primitives. So the agent API is now capable of invoking these AI primitives or using these AI building blocks to kind of do a series of, multi-step action or be able to perform a complicated task in that sense. So again, we already had the foundation set by having these AI primitives already as part of the Cortex suite. So the agent essentially is only like running these in a series of steps in based on the understanding of the task that you had given it. So it's just like essentially building a wrapper on top of these just to make sure it has this capability to run or orchestrate these tasks in a specific sequence in a smart way. But yeah, again,
what about using a lot of times, like when I think about agents, there's tool usage is part of that. Outside of the stuff that's built into Snowflake directly, even in order to pull data, is there ways of essentially extending the tools to reach out to other places where I don't know, like to do a web search or to hit an API endpoint to bring in additional information?
I think currently all of this, again, is only limited to the Snowflake security and governance boundary because only we don't want the data to move out of, Snowflake elsewhere. But again, you never know. This is only like the first iteration of like the Snowflake Cortex agents coming out, depending on what the customers want and where the product might go. There might be an option in the future to be able to go out of the security boundary, and like it doesn't have to be a write out, right? You could simply be reading the data in from external world into the Snowflake security boundary as well. So that, who knows, there might be something in the future, but as of now it's within the governance and security perimeter.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's similar to what Snowflake did for like UDF support as well, where originally UDF couldn't call outside the boundaries of Snowflake, but then eventually they supported external calls as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the PM, but I can on a broader level think of it happening in the future.
Okay, and then what's next for your course and for Cortex that you can share?
Okay, I think the biggest thing is that one, because the Cortex agents are out, I would definitely ask anyone to check out the Cortex agents and what it can do, especially in an enterprise setting, right? Because we've been talking about agents everywhere, but what it really means in an enterprise setting and how could you think about using agents in a very like a productionized way is something it's super exciting for everybody. So everyone should check out the Cortex agents. We have a bunch of demos, quick starts and tutorials out. So if you want to get building right away. Secondly, for the course, you should totally take the generative AI course, skill up, level up, and reach out to us if you have any questions. And there's also going to be more courses coming up in the series of courses. So it's all free for anybody to level up and get to the next level in your career.
Mm-hmm. Do you cover agents in your course, or was this too new essentially for when you were developing the course?
Yeah, so agents is not covered in the course that is already published, but there is an upcoming course on like part 2 of this generative AI course. Essentially, it might be covered in the part 2 of the course, which is also not too far away, like, just a couple of months down the line.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, awesome. Vino, thanks for coming back. Pleasure as always.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm hoping to return as a host for the next season, I guess.
Yeah. All right.
I'm here to take your job, Sean.
All right. Well, we'll have you back. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.